Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Rose Report. Tonight, I'm joined by Red Eagle Politics, who's a political strategist and a commentator. Thank you so much for coming on.
Yep, thanks for having me.
So I wanted to have you on because we are coming to the end of primary season in the midterms, and there is really a question of where the Republican Party is going. Many of Trump's endorsements have gotten their primary wins. We saw a big slate of wins in Illinois and Virginia, especially recently. One of the questions has been, is Trump still the leader of the party, even with all of these endorsements? So just in your personal opinion, do you think that these endorsement wins signify the fact that he is still the de facto leader of the Republican Party?
Yeah, I still think he's the de facto leader. I think that if he was still president, his endorsement probably would have a little bit more sway than it currently does. I think that if he also was still on social media and was able to communicate with the base, that his endorsement would have a lot more sway than it currently does. But as of now, I just have to say that he still is that leader of the party. There's not really a clear second in command for who holds the most sway. I mean, a lot of people are talking about DeSantis being a potential, successor to Trump in terms of the presidency after Trump retires from politics. But as a result, who's actually calling the shots now in the party? It's still by and large Donald Trump more so than anybody else.
And it's interesting that you bring up DeSantis because we both know he is someone who is emerging very much on the national stage. But overall, his national approval rating is only about 33%. He doesn't have the same name brand recognition. He's not banging down the door of conservative media in the way someone in his position might be. Do you think that's because he's unsure if Trump's going to run, or do you see him, even if Trump does run, him running as well?
I can't see him running if Donald Trump is going to run. I think it would be basically career suicide if he was able to do that. Definitely, it's going to be a very divisive primary, and I just can't see him beating Trump. And even if he does, it would still damage the morale within the GOP. I just couldn't see him doing it. But I definitely think that he's somebody who wants to still build up his war chest. He's fundraising a lot of money, I believe over 100 million plus in the bank, which again, that could partially fund a presidential campaign right there, not just in a primary, but in a general election. So yeah, I really think that he wants to run at some point. I think that he's going to wait till 2028 and keep building up that war chest so he can be that clear front runner.
And with DeSantis, one of the key groups Republicans have been trying to court, at least over the last 4 or 5 years, is Hispanic voters. But yet, when you look at his numbers with Hispanic voters, they're not as impressive as you would think they would be, seeing as he's the governor of Florida. There's a very big Hispanic community there. It's about 28 to 33%. Why do you think he's having such an issue with Hispanic voters nationally? Is it his messaging, or do people simply not know him enough?
It's probably more so that people don't know him enough. I mean, in Florida, he did very well with Hispanics in 2018. Obviously, Florida Hispanics are not the same in terms of their voting patterns as Hispanics nationwide. But I think that a lot of it is name recognition. That doesn't necessarily mean that if his name recognition was up higher, that he would be more electable than Trump nationwide, or that he would do better than Trump with Hispanic voters or white working class voters, or whatever constituency you're going to need to do better with in order to win a general election. But I do believe a lot of his low polling is in part due to name recognition. You see polls that have him down to Kamala Harris by like 5 points. I think that's ridiculous. It doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to energize voters enough to do better than Donald Trump would, or that he still wouldn't energize the opposition the way that Trump does if he was ever that guy who was the leader of the GOP or the leader of the conservative base. But I think a lot of it is low name recognition.
And with Trump, you mentioned before that the fact that he's not on social media, it is a detriment to the power of his endorsement. He relied very heavily on social media pretty much his whole time in politics and even in the public eye. There was an idea that through the launching of his own social media platform, he would be able to come back to dominance. Do you think as the primary season goes on, as midterms emerge, will it become even more difficult for Trump to gain such a hold over the Republican Party as there are new voices coming up because of his lack of social media? Or is it because he's Trump, it doesn't matter?
Well, I mean, I don't really see anybody that's currently that voice on social media that is not banned that really could pose a threat to Trump's influence regardless. Obviously, it's a big detriment. He's not going to get the same engagement and reach on Truth Social or whatever as he, has on Twitter. There are talks that maybe if Elon Musk goes through with the buy, he'll let Trump back on Twitter, even though Trump has said he might not do that. But I think that at least he could like copy paste his Truth Social posts, or there'll be some way for people to see his messaging better under the new leadership of the app. But I mean, definitely, I don't really still see anybody else really claiming that mantle. And I think ahead of the midterms, Trump's going to be on the campaign trail. He's going to be doing his rallies. He's going to still be getting, good engagement with the base. I don't really think that he's going to lose any influence between now and then, for sure, especially as he announces or gets closer to presumably announcing his 2024 run.
And if you take it state by state, he's having success from the West Coast, East Coast. It's pretty much widespread with his endorsements and his candidates. However, when you get to Georgia, he was not very successful there with the governorship, with the Secretary of State. There seems to be something he's not seeing, or a disconnect. And you see people on the Trump team on Twitter be very frustrated with it. They don't understand why voters are not pretty much doing what he says in Georgia. What is the disconnect in your view there? Is it that Georgia is such a mecca of local politics that maybe he's not involved in it? Why was he not able to really be the one to decide the governor primary?
Well, I think it's a multitude of factors. A lot of the people that ran got Trump's endorsement for these statewide offices, and they didn't do anything else. I mean, they didn't campaign. David Perdue did not run a good campaign. Brian Kemp, with all of his faults, actually, did everything that he could possibly do to get voters on his side. A lot of people will mention crossover voting, and I think that might be part of it. That might have helped Brad Raffensperger avoid a runoff in the Secretary of State race, who was probably the most hated of the statewide officials in the GOP. But other than that, I think that it's just sort of an anomaly, and Republicans put up some bad candidates and didn't effectively attack the more establishment leaders. And as a result, they ended up falling a bit short.
And with this midterm season, obviously the party that's in power usually loses the House by a substantial margin, just depends on how much. With Trump, he lost about 40 seats. There's been bigger losses. Republicans seem very confident that they're going to retake the House. I think they will as well, but it's about that margin. So with Biden underwater so much in his approval rating, about 39% nationally, do you think we're going to see a massive red wave, or will it be more moderate than we were expecting for the House?
I think we're still going to see a red wave. I think the question that everybody's asking, including myself, is what will the margin be? I think that Republicans are going to gain more than, I guess you would say, 30 seats in the House, but can they gain 50? Can they gain 60? The polls right now would say no, but at the same time, the polls, this point in 2010 were 50-50, and Republicans ended up having a wider popular vote win than they had back in 1994.
Right.
So it really just comes down to the energy. It comes down to how, turnout goes at a lot of these local races. And I think that as we get closer, a lot of the undecideds that may disapprove of Biden are going to come home. So I think Republicans are going to see probably a reverse 2018 in terms of like the national environment margin. The question is, will they be able to, flip 50 plus seats into the Republican column that they don't hold right now? I don't know the answer to that, but we'll just have to see.
And one of the factors Democrats are dealing with, of course, is Joe Biden's age, and the fact that there's not really certainty on whether or not they should even be pushing him for 24. In most situations, you would then look to the vice president, but Kamala Harris is pretty much underwater in her approval ratings. Cheney, Gore, these vice presidents all started with higher approval ratings than she has now. Is there any way to really utilize Kamala Harris, in your view, for Democrats in order to make up some gains? Because she's appointed in charge of the border. She does nothing with it. And she's not even really hitting the same way that even Joe Biden did under Obama in the first term with media. So what is the issue there? How can Democrats sort of reboot her in your mind, or is it even possible?
I don't know if it's even possible. I mean, you look at somebody like Kamala Harris. She's a very unlikable person. And there's really no base there. I mean, she'll have like a very loud, online support base, but other than that, she doesn't really have any. I don't think she helped Biden at all being on the ticket in 2020. A lot of people said, oh, she'll help with women, she'll help with Black voters, but I don't really believe that that's entirely the case. Even when you look into it, look at her past record, if anything, it would, demoralize Black voters a little bit. If she were to, be at the top of the ticket in 2024. Personally, I don't believe that they would even want to run her Biden is somebody who is basically, incapacitated at this point, but still them like trotting him out at age, like 82, I still think they would probably have more of a chance winning that way than they would by putting Kamala Harris at the top of the ticket. I mean, she's arguably more unlikable than somebody like Hillary Clinton. Yeah. And we all know how that ended. So.
And this is even before Republicans would begin their real operation to discredit her as a national leader. So this is really the best point Kamala Harris could be at before that begins. As we're getting closer, I think, every day to the 2024 election, there's been a lot of talk about what that primary stage will look like for Republicans. In 2016, we had a knockdown, drag out, fascinating primary stage for Republicans. But this time, it seems a bit more subdued. Do you think that you'll see people like Ted Cruz, like Rubio? Will you have that slate of senators up there trying to get the nomination? Or is it really a governor and businessman area? And of course, Trump.
Well, it really comes down to the fact if Trump runs or not. I think that if Trump runs, he's probably not even going to debate. Nobody like serious is going to challenge him. He may have like Asa Hutchinson, the governor of Arkansas, who becomes more and more of a RINO as every day passes by. You might have like a Larry Hogan, RINO governor of Maryland challenge him, maybe Liz Cheney. I mean, he's going to get like 80% in Iowa. It'll be very similar to 2020, and states may even start canceling primaries by the end of it. I feel as if Trump does not run, I think you are going to see that slate of candidates. You might see DeSantis. Obviously, he'll be the front runner as of now. It doesn't mean that he'll win the nomination because these things change. But then you'll see maybe a Cruz or Rubio get into the race as well. You'll see some senators. You'll see some governors probably. I don't know if like Greg Abbott would really make a run for it. But we'd really just have to see if Trump is not going to run. I mean, the doors are wide open, but can Republicans find that candidate to really replace him? I don't know. I think a lot of people will settle for DeSantis.
Yeah, DeSantis is someone I think there could be widespread agreement on, if not approval, for the Republican base. One thing, though, is that if Trump does run again in 2020, no matter what you think happened there, he did not have the best campaign. He was not out there with the best strategists. He certainly left a lot of holes that if the Biden administration didn't fill, they at least glazed over. So going into 2024, let's say Trump does announce, do you think, based off what you're saying now, that he is ready with a new team of people, that he has learned any of the strategic lessons from the 2020 election enough to be able to run not only a competent campaign, but a campaign with the same type of energy that you had in 2016, or at least the kind of discipline that you did then?
I think that he will probably run a campaign that is not as good as 2016, but I think he has learned somewhat from 2020. Some of the people that were around Donald Trump in 2020, like Brad Parscale, who essentially robbed the campaign, dumped a lot of money into unwinnable. He's out of the picture. Jared and Ivanka, who arguably diluted some of the, social conservative messaging a little bit, they're out of the picture as well. So I think that he's going to be running a campaign that probably is not going to be perfect. Again, he's not 70 years old again. He's going to be 78. I still think he has a lot of energy. I think that he'll hit Biden where it counts, and he'll be able to basically win off that fact alone. So I think he'll run a campaign. Like I said, it's not going to be as good as 2016, but I think that it will not be, as mediocre as 2020.
And in talking about Biden, one of the things that was striking to me during the 2020 campaign was that Biden did not seem to have an appointed main strategist in the way other campaigns have. There really was not an Axelrod. He had his chief of staff, who would become his chief of staff rather. There wasn't an Axelrod. There wasn't a Bannon. There was not somebody who you could say was the strategic mind of the Biden campaign. To you, who are the people on his team, or does he even have anyone, who you would say present the most difficult challenge, are the most brilliant in that orbit, or is he completely lacking in that?
I honestly don't believe that he really has anybody on that team that's really somebody that stands out. I mean, he had people in 2020, as you mentioned, who were just like there. There was nobody that, really comes to mind as like a lead strategist. I mean, even Hillary Clinton on her campaign, she had strategists that had a decent amount of name recognition in the political world on both sides. Biden, I mean, he definitely has people around him. We don't really know much about them compared to some of these other candidates in the past that have run and, won the White House. So I don't know who he'll have on his team, but either way, like there's no way that he's going to be able to spin his tenure as a positive one when you have a negative 20 approval rating, when even the people that like you only like you because you are not the opposition at this point. Like that's all he has left. I mean, that's not a coalition that's going to be able to win an election in 2024, especially going up against your predecessor that had a much higher approval rating than you among independents, which arguably was his Achilles heel throughout Trump's presidency. So Biden's managing to outdo him where the numbers count, and his approval rating is just falling as we speak.
It is. And it almost seems like during 2020, Biden's campaign was run by corporate America. You had quite a few marketing firms involved. You had an idea that Biden was really just being directed, and not in the way that someone directs a candidate where to go. He was being directed in every facet of his campaign. And a lot of young conservatives have asked me, do you think that if Trump runs again, that he will have that young conservative support from those traditional areas, from the young Republicans, from groups that in the past have sort of been antagonistic towards Trump? Is there going to be that level of support? Because you're seeing Mike Pence now go out and speak at many different colleges and forums, and he seems to be attracting quite a bit of interest from young conservatives and libertarians. So do you think that Trump has that youth bench, or has that sort of transferred over to the Mike Pence wing a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I still think Trump has the, young conservative core. I mean, the groups that Mike Pence is speaking to usually are like these neoconservative type of organizations. And I don't really believe that they make up the large portion of Trump's young base per se. I think a lot of the young energy for Trump came from the fact that he was like edgy. He was somebody who would just go out there and say what's on his mind. He kind of had this appeal to a lot of, young people, especially young men in the conservative sphere. And I think that he still has the support from them by and large as of now, at least from what I see. I mean, a lot of groups like, TPUSA, whatever you may say about them, they still have a large core of, an audience there, and they tend to be larger. A lot of the, college Republicans groups as well. And then you see a lot of, more nationalist, young, paleocon organizations that are popping up, and there's a lot of energy behind them as well. I mean, the old guard, like, Young Americans for Liberty or whatever, whoever's having Mike Pence speak there, I mean, they don't really bring that much traction. They don't have these big events. They don't have these big summits. They don't really bring in the funding anymore. So I don't really think they're going to have a dent in the vote anytime soon among young conservatives.
And one important point that Trump will face if he runs again is the vice president pick, because obviously it's not going to be Mike Pence. I think that's completely off the table. And DeSantis, they're both in the same state. That wouldn't work. I don't necessarily think DeSantis wants to waste his political run on being Trump's vice president, even if Trump is willing to move. Is there anyone you see that actually brings something to Trump's ticket for running? Because there can be a lot of people we'd like to see on there. There's a lot of people that would be good ideologically, but who actually contributes to Trump winning the White House again if he runs, in your view?
Well, I really think that this is a question that the answer to it is not exactly like one that a lot of people are thinking of, because think of it, what do we exactly want out of a Trump VP? I think there's a lot of people that are running this midterm cycle that would fit great, but I mean, you're not going to take somebody who's been in Congress or the Senate or a governor for 2 years and or less than 2 years and put them on a presidential ticket. That just doesn't happen. So I think a lot of those people will be in the running for 2028 and could be Trump's successor, but he's not going to make them his VP. I think you also want somebody that's not going to be instantly seen as the instant front runner for 2028, because a lot of, those great people that I just mentioned for 2028, they would already be at a disadvantage. So I would want somebody who would add something to the ticket, is decent, maybe not perfect ideologically, but also would not pose a threat to a solid candidate in 2028. Personally, I think somebody like, Mike Garcia out of California, if he wins again, he's, suburban appeal, and he's actually pretty solid on the issues. He's able to win Biden plus 10 districts while voting like he's from rural Kansas. And you also have Kim Reynolds, the governor of Iowa. She's pretty good on a lot of issues. Is she good at debating? That's another question, because the VP debate is kind of mainly what a lot of people watch from the running mates. And Mike Pence, regardless of, what you think of him or whatever, he was very good at debating.
Yes.
He definitely added something to the ticket there. So you want somebody that's going to help him win. And I think that's a big part of it.
That is definitely a big part of it. And those VP debates do matter, especially if Trump is not willing to debate in the same way he was in 2016, even 2020. I think even Jake Tapper would say it was said in the past, the night went to Pence when he was debating. So the question of Pence is also interesting because a lot of people are very angry at Pence. There's a very big divide in the Republican Party. Do you think that Pence is willing to go down like this? Because there's a lot of talk that he's going to run. And if he runs, he has a very big evangelical following. That was never really tarnished. That was never really taken away unless they have left because of political reasons. So does Pence pose a threat to a consolidated and unified Republican Party if he chooses to run?
Well, I think he probably would do better in a primary against Trump than somebody like a Larry Hogan or a Mitt Romney. Would he do it? I mean, that's a real question, but he's not going to be able to win. I mean, Trump did very well among evangelicals, surprisingly well among them in the South back in the 2016 primary. Ted Cruz, that was supposed to be his constituency, yes. And Trump ended up outperforming vastly with them. So I think Pence would probably be able to get like 20% of the vote or so, but he probably would have to drop out after the first few primaries. And the more that he would stay in, the more he would divide the party. But at the end of the day, I don't really know if it would really change that much. It definitely would, I guess you would say, depend on if Pence would try and like lead this revolt and tell his supporters to like not vote for Trump in the general. But at the end of the day, I don't even think he's going to run. So we'll have to see.
Yeah, I think it's definitely up in there, but there might be more fire in Pence than we think right now. Just sort of in closing, I wanted to know your impression of the midterm field by and large on the Republican side. It does seem to be much more hard right than in the past. There's a lot of people out there who would be described as being based. Do you think this is a solid ideological field, or is it more a group of people who are saying the things they need to in order to get Trump's endorsements?
Well, I think it's a fairly solid field overall. I mean, not everybody that's been nominated has been perfect. Obviously, Nancy Mace down in South Carolina, she was unfortunately renominated, although it wasn't by much. And a lot of the impeachment tend to be going down. I mean, even David Valadao barely won, and Trump didn't even endorse his challenger. Maybe if he did, he would have lost, although his district is like a Biden plus, I don't know, 15 district or so. But either way, yeah, I mean, you look at people like J.D. Vance, Blake Masters running for Senate, Adam Laxalt in Nevada, a lot of very solid candidates running in open seats in swing states that are going to be massive upgrades over their predecessors. And we do love to see it. And in the House, there's plenty of people that have been nominated. Obviously, we haven't been able to get every single person that we want primaried out of there, but a lot of them at least have been put on watch. So we'll see how that affects their voting record as we move forward.
Definitely. It's certainly a year to watch this freshman class, or will be freshman class of Republican politicians, to see where they fall in the more post-Trump era or the era that's about to become even more Trump. Thank you so much for coming on. Where can people follow you on social media to keep up with your work?
Well, they could subscribe to my YouTube channel, youtube.com/c/Red Eagle TV, and also follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Red Eagle Patriot.
Perfect. And we'll link all that below. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yep, no problem.